Okay, we're going to start out with putting up my Patreon in the chat, just for any of the people who are interested. And now this is going to sound kind of like I'm talking about force when it comes to the actual topic. It's not necessarily force, it's just essentially we're talking about Congress actually exerting its power here. And because when it comes down to it is because they've essentially have negated their power when it comes to protecting people's rights. When it comes to the way government acts, government essentially is supposed to protect people's freedom of speech. And this is something that could easily be done. We don't need any of these ideas of where people try to state where, oh, we need this idea of a digital Bill of Rights. We don't need any of this digital Bill of Rights. We don't need to actually force the business to change its actual operations. But what we need to do is have them actually declare what they are. And this is what Congress could actually do. And what we have them do is very simple. Is we have them actually declare what they're doing. And this is something that's quite simple. I think that we could crap. Let's see where we went wrong. Okay, come on, load. I think that we can actually get to the point of where we are at and show that if we can get them to declare the difference between social media and declare those points, I think we can actually get a lot more rights for people. Because when you declare yourself as social media, you're declaring that you're actually independent from the actual people. You're not actually showing yourself as an actual view on the site that you're arranging. And you're actually defaulting to the actual point of where you are at. Now, there's something completely different from what we see from what's happening on these social media sites. They're not doing that. They're applying their own views, which is something you would actually find from an actual publisher, such as something like a BuzzFeed, a New York Times, anything like that. Now, this is completely different. Now, there's going to be pluses and minuses for both sides. Now, they're going to have to decide this. Do they want to be a publisher and be able to express their own views from that side and actually have an actual user agreement which they can state, we don't want these people here, we don't want these type of people coming on our site, we think this is the way people should speak on our site, and express that on there. If they want that, they're going to have to list themselves as an actual publisher, because this is the way things are going to have to be. But if they want to actually keep people on, they're going to have to adopt themselves as actual social media. Now, when it comes to a publisher, I hate to tell people this, but you lose a lot of people, because what ends up happening is when we see this, we see what has impacted things like BuzzFeed. When you start to push ideas that tend to be left-leaning in the publisher arena, they just can't hold up in the digital realm. It's just a fact. They can't hold up to anything else because there isn't the interest. And what that would mean is they would lose a great deal of their market. So what ends up happening is they end up virtually dying out. And this is just something that ends up happening, and they need to realize with it. And this is what happens when you go with the publisher route. So you're going to have to rely upon not just advertisements, but you need a lot of donations to supplement your actual magazines or your actual publication yourself that you're doing in this what would have formerly have been social media platforms, such as we're talking about Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or YouTube or whatever whatever the output is. And this is what they're going to have to realize is they're going to have to realize that this is going to have to be the end outcome is when we look at this, we need to understand that that's going to have to be the point. And when we look at these, what they've done is they've essentially want to run between these 2 points. They want the benefits of the publisher points of view, where they can essentially set their own rights as a site and what they can do and how they can enforce these actual rules the way any other site would. The way, let's say, if you went to chat on a music band site, the way they would set their site, and they would technically be viewed as a publisher. So they want something like that, but they want to essentially get the output of social media. They don't want to essentially go in the middle and have to. They want to go in the middle and get both. This is because they want the money. They want because there's a lot of money in being able to use both, so they can actually get the benefits of on the publisher status, because the publisher status gets them to establish their worldview and the way they would want to set up their site normally, and social media gets you the number of people, because people are going to assume that it's going to be when they hear social media, they think free speech, and they think they can actually use their First Amendment rights. Being if we're talking about freedom of press, freedom of religion, or freedom of speech, these rights are supposed to be essentially respected, as well as they expect some level of the Fourth Amendment to be respected. And when it comes down to it, so what ends up happening is they end up trying to essentially follow the rules of the publisher status, but make believe that they're a social media status. So essentially, the people who would normally be on the normal platform of that publisher status get all of the benefits. They essentially get all of the bumps up in these companies because of the way they think. They essentially would normally be on this site and would normally interact as they normally would. But when it comes down to these other people that would not necessarily be on this, if they knew this was the standard, they would, but they're going on that site because they're listed as social media. Now, essentially, what the idea is these social media sites like Facebook, the ideas of YouTube, the ideas of Twitter, they want these people's money from advertising. They want all that money, but they're not willing to give them the even treatment like the other people get. These people are essentially treated as second-class citizens because they don't share the right worldview. Now, if you were based on the idea of a social media platform, this is where you find that they don't essentially lead where the site is supposed to go. They essentially say, we're going to essentially adopt what the Constitution says. We're going to stay out of the way. The only time where anything's going to change otherwise is when criminal conduct comes in it. And we're going to apply all criminal conduct codes to everyone equally. We're not going to state that this person from this ideology did something criminally wrong, so we're going to ignore it. But this person did something criminally wrong, so we're going to go after them, and they wouldn't be doing that. That's the way usually a publisher reacts. A publisher has the full right to essentially arbitrarily basically arbitrarily pick and choose how they want to judge their actual site, and people can go elsewhere when they're doing that. Now, when it comes to criminal codes with it, obviously there's people can independently file these charges. The charges from the top with it don't have to necessarily be filed just for seeing it, because it's not what it calls, not a crime not to file a crime that you saw. That's not criminal conduct. But what's happening with it is the actual business models themselves. They're using business models, and they're coming up with their private business model, which essentially is a publisher. But when it comes out to their public business model, they're actually showing themselves as social media. This is essentially a very, very deceptive practice. Now, what Congress could do is essentially say, you need to declare yourself basically either, if you're going to be social media, you need to accept the Constitution as it's written, and you cannot back out of it. If you do any of these things with it, you are going to be held liable in the court of law for doing so. You cannot ban people for anything. The idea of hate speech doesn't exist. None of these things exist. And this is actually a smart idea that was actually put forth on Steven Crowder's show yesterday, on Thursday, that he does, and it was actually an interview with Alex Jones. And now this is something Alex Jones actually brought up, which is actually a smart idea of having Congress actually assert its own power, which is not using actual force. It's just basically making their business model actually fit to what they're going to be doing. So it's not deceptive practices. And that's merely what you're doing. You're not breaking up any monopolies. You're not using like a Sherman Antitrust Act. You're not basically essentially using any of these bills from the progressive era that were meant to essentially be abusive toward the development of business. All you're merely doing is making them declare themselves. If they want to actually have this objective of trying to impact the world, then they have to act as a publisher, and they're going to have to come out in the open and state that. But that means they're going to lose all of their benefits of a social media site, and they're probably going to lose a lot of their people. If they want to come out in the open and say, you know what, we're going to drop all this garbage, we're not going to establish ourselves as a worldview, we're going to let people have freedom of speech, we're going to adopt the Constitution as our guidelines for our site, and we want to be social media. We're not going to be doing any of this other garbage anymore. We want to stick up with social media. Let's say if Facebook says that, then Facebook says we're going to be social media. Then what happens to Twitter? Twitter goes in the garbage, because Twitter, like let's say Twitter says, Twitter's already come out in the open pretty much and says they want to impact the worldview. So Twitter then pretty much goes bankrupt the way BuzzFeed is looking like they're going. And Twitter goes bankrupt because they're already a public stock, and it's not likely that people are going to want to donate to something that's a public stock, and they're likely to go belly up, and it'll basically go in the gutter, and people are going to say there's no reason to stay here, and it's just going to shrink to basically no users, and it's going to be the next Friendster, which basically, for any of you who even use that, That should be an idea with it for anybody who even used that. That's a no name social media site that died and was even smaller than MySpace killed that, and that was considered to be second to MySpace. So when we and MySpace is pretty much dead, as if not fully dead by now. Now, when we talk about this, is we need to understand that this is about making sure that the actual consumer and the actual business have an understanding. This is basically all we're doing here. This is to make sure that there's an understanding between consumers and businesses. And you don't want some type of deception to happen, because there's going to be a problem when you have this. And when you have this deception between the business and the consumer, frankly, there's going to be some problems that occur, and that's going to have a lot of things to do with what ends up happening. And what's going to occur is that people are going to be very, very mad. And when they see this, when they keep seeing this deceptive practice of acting as a trying to act as a publisher, but claiming your social media. Now, what should end up happening is, if they actually assert their power from Congress, they can actually get something done with this, and they don't even have to pass anything. They could say, we want you to declare what you are. Actually use the actual power of government. Just say, declare what you are. Otherwise, there's going to be a serious problem, because because there's rules for each. A publisher has its own rules that give it benefits for the media, for actual media itself. Now, and it has its own levels of immunity for what it might do. Now, social media doesn't necessarily have those immunities, but it has other types of immunities from a lot of other criminal codes. But the problem being is, you have to follow the actual Constitution. You cannot block people. And that's where you get the actual issues. And this is where we find the whole problems. And when we start talking about this is something that needs to be explained. And I know that this is going to be this is a lot difficult for people to understand, is why we shouldn't be going in the ideas of where people are saying we need a digital bill of rights. Because a digital bill of rights, I mean, we're talking that it just gets into more government force. Government force, as we've explained before, doesn't work. Government force is a failed idea. And we don't need any more failed ideas. Every time we go to government force, it creates more and more problems. And all we're looking for is we're just looking for that declaration from the actual companies themselves. And if we could get the actual company themselves to declare themselves as whatever they want to declare themselves, pick one or the other. And it allows the user to basically say, okay, this is a publisher. Okay, then they're declaring their actual viewpoint. Okay, it doesn't match with my viewpoint, and they're basically going to be targeting me for stating my viewpoint that's not going to match up with them. Okay, my best option is to leave. And basically, I'll take all of my circle of friends and everybody like that, and we're just going to take off. Well, basically what that's going to mean is that it's going to be a very, very negative impact for those things with it, but it means that they're going to have the ability to act as a publisher. And that's just going to be what happens with it. Now, when it comes to these publishers and social media, is they only grow when that platform is successful. And the thing is if those ideas just aren't successful and it limits people, guess what? You just aren't going to grow anywhere. Well, this is the whole point, that if you want to grow, you're going to have to basically admit one thing, that you're going to have to lean toward the idea of being social media and drop that actual worldview and trying to influence people. Don't be an actual, you don't want to be an influencer from a company. You actually just want to stay out of the way. That's really your best thing to do, is stay out of the way and let it grow as it's going to grow. Basically, you the only thing you should be concerned about is the dollars in your pocket. And I know it sounds kind of harsh and greedy or to some, but frankly, that's it. You just want to make money, and that's your basic goal. And when it comes down to the stockholders, you have, if you have stockholders, you need to make those people money, because if you're not doing that, you're not doing a good job. And there should be no worldview, no actual other viewpoints that actually matter. None of that matters. If someone says, "Oh, but hate speech," nope, out the door. Because frankly, if that affects your bottom line, I'm sorry, but they need to go. You tell them, if they want to put that ahead of actually earning money, they need to go. Because there is no other purpose for business than to basically expand your business, to actually do work through voluntary exchange and to make money. That's it. When people came up with this idea, is to, oh, we need to use business to influence people and to make my mark on the world and all this other garbage. No, your purpose for business is to provide a product or service, to make money, and to work through voluntary exchange. And through this system, you're going to make the lives of people better. If you want to actually improve the world, do that. Stay out of the way. When you actually try to influence people and do this other garbage, you're making the lives of people worse. And people basically are really, really mad when you do that. The more you try to influence them, and the more you try to intervene, the more pissed off they get. And you're going to notice that. And this is what ends up happening. People don't like intervention. Stay out of the way. Basically, leave everybody alone. And it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. And if you want to actually function as a business, you should be looking at the social media end and to stay out of the way. And basically, if it's criminal conduct, obviously report it. But the fact is that's all you have to worry about. But we have an actual criminal code in the United States, and you can worry about it there with it. When it comes to other countries, let the other countries deal with their own criminal code. And when it comes down to on the ethical standpoint, if you have an ethical, if you want to stand on something ethical, stand on it when it comes to other countries. Say you're not going to back away from the standards of the United States Constitution. Say that's going to be a standard for the social media. You're not going to create any other social media platforms, and if anybody's mad about that, it's their own problem, and they can explain to their own people in their own countries why they don't have access to the social media, because it's because of a bunch of censors at the top of the government. And those government officials can explain to rioting people in their own country that it's because of them, because they're scared of the access of information, that's why this is happening. And eventually what's going to happen is you will cause positive social change. You do it through actually standing up for individual rights. And the way you're going to do that is actually standing up for it, not by suppressing it. You don't suppress people's individual freedoms of speech and all these other things like that, and say, "Oh, but we're standing up for a worldview and we're doing the right thing." No, you're not. You're not doing the right thing. And this is why, when it comes to Congress should be enforcing this to make them make their decision. And frankly, a lot of them are going to make stupid decisions which is going to, in the end, make a lot of investors pull out of their companies because they know it's going to be a horrible investment, because no one wants to invest in a company that doesn't even think that profit is important. If you don't think profit's important as a company, you're a moron. That's the only purpose of a company, is basically provide a product or service, develop profit. That's it. Do it through voluntary exchange. It's really simple. It doesn't take much of a genius to figure this out. I mean, you have YouTube content creators. This is how they work. How do you think they work? Why do you think they're mad when you demonetize their stuff and you steal money from them? They're mad because you're stealing from them. It's called theft. And you say, oh, but their content isn't fit for monetization. No, you stole from them, and that's purely theft. And this is what we're talking about here. This is the sole purpose. They're essentially an independent business owner. Their sole purpose is to create a product or service, to use voluntary exchange with it, meaning to develop people to watch their videos and to gain subscribers, and to actually develop a profit. That's it. That's all they're doing. They understand the basics, and apparently, with it, the companies that they're working with don't even understand these basics, because they think that you need to make this some type of world change thing. If you want to actually do some things to change the world, use that for charity. That's completely different. When it comes down to business, you only need those three things, and that's it. If you want to change the things with it, do for charity. That's a complete utter different issue, and that's why we have charity set up. You don't need government force. You don't need to do anything with force. You don't need to include your worldview. You don't need any of that other garbage. The idea is you just basically let the actual idea of people's rights actually run through, and people actually have a system of how we do these rights, and your rights end at the start of someone else's rights. And we have a list of what actually constitutes the idea of freedom of speech, and we see that the Supreme Court has ruled that hate speech does not exist. Hate speech is a myth. And the fact is hate speech is just a term of saying, I don't want to deal with someone else's free speech, and instead of putting my fingers in my ears, I'm just going to be irritating and claim it's hate speech to essentially bring a bullied mob against them. And that's really all it is. It's essentially basically send the mob after them. And that's really all what hate speech is about. So they go screaming like a banshee, and they go sick the mob on them. And that's what it ends up becoming. And this is why we need these actual companies to declare, are you a publisher or are you social media? If you're social media, end with this garbage and stick to the actual Constitution as it's written. If you're a publisher, guess what? You're going to lose probably the majority of the people that are there, because when it comes down to it, they're not going to stick around, because they can see the writing on the wall, and they're not going to stick around for this garbage, because they're not going to stick around if you're going to say their type of content is not welcome. Now onto another note with it, we're going to go to the point of, I know this isn't listed in the topic, but there's only so much room you can put for the topic. This is kind of a little added note for the idea of International Women's Day. I'm going to give a little shout out to my fiance, and for what she actually does for in her free time. She enjoys doing a lot of charity for being victims of sexual abuse, and a lot of people less fortunate for her than her, like children and people that live in a lot of like dire poverty. She works through one of her. She works with one of her friends who's chaplain, who works with an orphanage, and and she will basically during her off times work with another one of her female friends that does some charity work as well to basically help a lot of these people that need a lot of help out there, and just want to give like a little bit of shout out to her for International Women's Day, because when it comes down to it is uh, people are gonna basically say about all of these other people out there they're doing stuff, but they're not really actually going out there and doing things with it. Uh, One of the things with it is obviously there's people that are actually what it calls in horrible situations like Asia Bibi out in Pakistan that are basically put on death row for drinking from a well. Yes, people like that need to be mentioned, but also you need to mention actually people that are actually going out there and doing charity work and are actually willing to actually do the work out there, not just people who just jump in front of the camera and want to actually see themselves talk. We're sick and tired of seeing these people like Alexandria Ocasio Cortez and Elizabeth Warren and all these other people that basically they just want to see themselves speak. And you got Meghan McCain and all these other just pieces of garbage. They just want to see themselves speak, and they feel that what it called that, oh, International Women's Day, oh, it makes me special and blah 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 blah, and they're just a bunch of pieces of garbage, and that's what they are with it. They're just doing a bunch of blabbing, and all they do in the end is make people's lives worse. And you have like Meghan McCain, who basically praises her father, who uh, who embraced terrorists out in Syria with Ansar al-Sharia, and she calls him basically a hero, while she says anybody who actually questions American foreign policy interventionism as being non-patriotic, which is complete hogwash. When we know that interventionism just leads to blowback, which means we get more terrorist attacks here at home. And if we wanted to actually be safe, we would stop the actual attacking there, and we would bring everybody back home because we know we would actually be safe for once. So people like her are spitting out a bunch of hogwash. And you have people like Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, who has two eyes pointing in two different directions, talks like she's actually a boss of something when she's actually never done anything, and then can't even come up with any legitimate thought of her own. And then when it comes down to it, the only piece of legislation is actually being blocked by fellow Democrats because it's so unbelievably insane. Even Chuck Schumer said he didn't want it coming up on the Senate side because he was afraid that Republicans were going to knock it down and it was going to make Republicans look good. And he was calling it a Republican ploy. I mean, this should give you an idea of how insane she is. Then we have Elizabeth Warren, who basically perpetuated lies during her whole life about the being Native American, when we know that she is clearly not, and she has basically less than basically her highest point of Native American blood would actually be less than half of the average United States citizen. This should give you an average clue of how little Native American blood she has. We're talking, me myself, I have basically close to like 10 times the amount that she has, that she's trying to prove. And I can actually show you the last uh, uh, relative that actually was actually enrolled in the tribe that would have actually been. But that's actually for another. That's actually a story for another day. But when we're talking about, we need to actually embrace people who actually do things for people, and these people are usually the ones that don't go out there taking the credit. And I think we need to actually finally uh, uh, we actually finally need to actually embrace some of these people that actually do this. And I think that's actually very, very important. Now, if you like this, I know it's a little bit short with it, but if you like it, like, subscribe, click the notification bell, make sure you share this all the way around, especially Twitter, because I'm still going to be blocked until 10 o'clock tonight Central Time. So I can't do any posts until then on Twitter. Uh, Make sure to check out my Patreon page and see if you can't donate there, or see if you can't get anybody else to donate there. And that's about it. I will see you guys tomorrow morning when I can actually post things on Twitter. Hopefully I'll have some activity on Twitter later on tonight if I'm still up. Bye, everyone.